When I pulled into the gas station for my first shift, it felt like stepping back in time. The sign over the pumps read, Star Gasoline, in big, neon red letters, though a few letters flickered weakly or didn't light up at all. It had the vibe of one of those old roadside stops you'd find on some forgotten stretch of Route 66. The place was clearly family-owned, with the kind of worn-down charm that comes from decades of use. The pumps were illuminated by a single overhead light, casting long, jittery shadows onto the cracked asphalt. The whole scene was strangely still, like the world had hit pause just for this gas station. Only one car was parked out front, its owner likely inside, grabbing a coffee or something. I sat in my car for a moment longer than I should have, watching the faint glow of the building spill out into the empty lot. "Okay, Alex," I muttered to myself. "It's just a gas station. You've done this before. Nothing to freak out about." I grabbed my backpack, stepped out of the car, and headed toward the entrance. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and I was immediately greeted by a rush of warm air carrying the smell of overcooked hot dogs and cheap floor cleaner. The convenience store part of the gas station was about what you'd expect. Shelves stocked with chips, candy, and canned drinks, a glass counter with lottery tickets and cigarettes, and a little corner near the entrance that displayed sun-faded posters advertising 2 hot dogs for $1.99. "Hello. You must be Alex," a cheerful voice called from the back. I turned to see a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a slightly hunched posture, sweeping up near the drink coolers. She straightened up as I approached, dusting off her hands on her jeans. Her friendly demeanor was almost disarming. "I'm Anne," she said, extending a hand. "I know my husband did the phone interview with you. We've been trying to find someone to take this shift for months. I'm too old to be staying up that late, but you're young, so you'll be fine." I shook her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Nice to meet you. Thanks for hiring me," and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please. We're just glad someone applied. I'll show you around real quick, then I'll get out of your hair. Don't worry, I won't bore you with the basics. You already know the job. All we need is someone who can follow directions." She moved quickly for someone her age, gesturing for me to follow as she launched into her walkthrough. The back of the store was pretty standard. A closet full of cleaning supplies on the left, a small, single-stall bathroom on the right. When she opened the bathroom door, I had to stifle a grimace. The walls were covered in scratched-up graffiti, names and initials carved into the tiles, and the floor had a permanent brownish stain in the grout. Still, it smelled like bleach, which was a small mercy. "Here's the cleaning closet," Anne said, pulling the door open to reveal mops, buckets, and bottles of cleaning solution neatly arranged on metal hooks. "And this," she pointed to a laminated yellow sheet taped to the wall, "is your cleaning checklist. Pretty straightforward stuff. Mop the floors, take out the trash, restock the shelves if you have time. Nothing too complicated." "Got it," I said, nodding along as she talked, and led me back to the front, where she showed me how to use the cash register and the ancient debit card machine that looked like it belonged in a museum. Finally, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of keys. "These are for locking up," she said, handing them over. "The silver ones for the front door, the bronze ones for the back. And over here," she pointed to the counter, where 2 laminated sheets sat side by side, "is what you need to know. The yellow list is for cleaning. The red list is, well, let's call it your employee manual." I glanced at the red sheet. It was printed in bold black text and laminated, just like the yellow one, but it had a lot more writing on it. The first line stood out immediately. "Welcome to Star Gasoline. This is your night shift employee manual. Follow all instructions carefully." And must have noticed my expression because she gave me a knowing look. "Don't let that scare you. It's just some extra rules to keep things running smoothly. Read it over when you've got a minute. You'll do fine as long as you follow the instructions." Her tone was casual, but something about the way she said instructions made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Thanks," I said, tucking the keys into my pocket, and smiled warmly. "All right then. You've got about 10 minutes before your shift officially starts. I'll leave you to it. If you've got any questions, just give me a call. My number's on the back of the red sheet." And with that, she grabbed her purse, waved goodbye, and disappeared out the door. For a few moments, I stood there in the silence, listening to the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The bell above the door jingled softly as the wind pushed it open slightly, then let it swing shut. I glanced at the clock above the counter. 9:53 p.m. "All right," I muttered, picking up the red laminated sheet. "Let's see what I signed up for." The rules were strange. Spend most of your time in the lit section of the store. Avoid staying in the unlit sections unless absolutely necessary. At exactly 12:05 a.m., go to the drink aisle and mop continuously until 12:25 a.m. Do not leave the aisle during this time for any reason. Check the rear camera feed every 30 minutes. If you see a shadowy figure staring at the camera, do not look directly at it. Use the compact mirror under the counter to check its position indirectly. If the shadows cast by the gas pumps all face the same direction, immediately turn off all the lights in the store, lock yourself in the back room, and wait until morning. The list went on, each rule more bizarre than the last. My stomach tightened as I read through them. Was this some kind of joke? A hazing ritual for new employees? I looked up at the nearest security monitor, my gaze scanning the grainy black and white footage of the gas pumps. The shadows looked normal, long and jagged, each one cast in a different direction by the flickering light above. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. "It's just a job," I muttered, setting the red sheet back on the counter. Probably some weird local tradition or something. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just signed up for something I wasn't ready for. As the clock ticked closer to 10 p.m., I tried to get into the rhythm of the job. I started with the cleaning checklist, figuring that keeping busy would help me ignore the unsettling feeling from earlier. The store was silent except for the occasional hum from the coolers and the faint whirring of the overhead lights. I grabbed a mop from the closet and filled the bucket with soapy water, wheeling it to the front of the store. As I mopped the tiled floor, I couldn't help but glance toward the glass windows. Outside, the lone light above the pumps continued to flicker, its glow stretching the shadows of the pumps across the lot. They seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, but I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. By the time I finished cleaning, it was just past 10:30 p.m. The parking lot was still empty, and not a single customer had come in since I started. I found myself staring at the clock, willing time to move faster. "Stay busy," I reminded myself. I wandered back to the counter and picked up the red sheet again. The rules still seemed absurd, but something about them made my skin crawl. Rule 2 caught my attention. At exactly 12:05 a.m., go to the drink aisle and mop continuously until 12:25 a.m. Do not leave the aisle during this time for any reason. Why the drink aisle? And why such a specific time? I glanced at my watch. It was only 10:45 p.m. Plenty of time before I had to worry about that. I leaned on the counter and scanned the security monitors. The camera feed for the pumps showed nothing but the faint flicker of the overhead light. The rear camera, labeled Backlot, showed the dark, empty expanse behind the store. I hadn't thought much about the cameras during the walkthrough, but now they seemed important. The red sheet had a rule about the rear camera too. If you see a shadowy figure staring at the camera, do not look directly at it. Use the compact mirror under the counter to check its position indirectly. I crouched down and pulled out the mirror, a small, round compact that looked like something you'd find in a makeup kit. I set it on the counter, feeling a little ridiculous. "This is insane," I muttered. The hours dragged on. I stayed busy restocking shelves, organizing snacks, and wiping down surfaces, but the unease lingered. Every time I glanced at the monitors, I half expected to see something. A figure, a shadow, anything that shouldn't be there. But nothing happened. At least, not until 11:58 p.m. I had just finished wiping down the counter when I noticed something on the rear camera. At first, I thought it was a smudge on the screen, a dark blotch near the corner of the frame. But as I leaned closer, my stomach tightened. It wasn't a smudge. It was a figure. It stood just at the edge of the camera's view, tall and shadowy, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness of the lot. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, facing the camera. I remembered the rule: do not look directly at it. My hands shook as I reached for the compact mirror. Holding it up, I angled it toward the screen. letting the reflection show the rear camera feed. The figure was still there, its head tilted slightly, as if it knew I was watching. "Don't panic," I whispered to myself. "Just wait." I crouched behind the counter, keeping the mirror angled so I could see the monitor without looking directly at it. My breathing was shallow, my pulse racing. 5 minutes felt like an eternity, but eventually, the figure began to fade. It didn't walk away or move. It just dissolved into the shadows, leaving the screen empty once more. I let out a shaky breath, my hands slick with sweat. "Okay, Rule 3 works," I muttered. But there was no time to relax. My watch read 12:03 a.m. 2 minutes until I had to mop the drink aisle. I grabbed the mop and bucket, my legs feeling like lead as I made my way to the back of the store. The drink aisle stretched out before me, lined with coolers humming softly in the dim light. I positioned myself at one end of the aisle, took a deep breath, and started mopping. The first few minutes were uneventful. I moved slowly, pushing the mop back and forth, keeping my head down as the instructions suggested. I even put on my headphones, blasting some upbeat music to drown out the eerie silence. But then I felt it. It started as a faint prickling sensation, like static electricity brushing against my skin. The air around me grew heavy, thick with an unexplainable tension. I kept mopping, refusing to look up, but the feeling intensified. It was as if something, or someone, was watching me. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. My grip tightened on the mop handle, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the music. "Just keep mopping," I whispered. The urge to look up was overwhelming. My instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stay in that aisle. But I remembered the rule: do not leave the aisle during this time for any reason. The shadow moved again, closer this time. I forced myself to focus on the mop, dragging it back and forth across the floor. The seconds dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, the timer on my watch beeped. It was 12:25 a.m. I dropped the mop into the bucket and wheeled it back to the cleaning closet as quickly as I could without breaking into a full sprint. My hands were trembling as I shut the closet door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The store was silent again, but the heavy, oppressive feeling lingered. I glanced at the monitors, half expecting to see the shadowy figure again, but the screens showed nothing out of the ordinary. I checked my watch. 12:30 a.m. Still hours to go before my shift ended. "This is going to be a long night," I muttered. By 12:45 a.m., the initial rush of fear from the drink aisle incident had dulled, replaced by a creeping exhaustion. I sat behind the counter, sipping a lukewarm energy drink I'd grabbed from the cooler. The taste was harsh, but I needed the caffeine to keep myself alert. Every little noise, the hum of the cooler, the faint creaks of the building settling, felt amplified in the silence. I glanced at the laminated red sheet again, my eyes scanning over the remaining rules. Most of them seemed designed to keep Fred at bay, but Rule 9 stuck out to me. If all shadows from the gas pumps faced the same direction toward the store, evacuate immediately and follow the outlined procedure. I looked up instinctively, my gaze shifting to the monitor showing the parking lot. The shadows were normal, stretching out in different directions as they had earlier in the night. I sighed in relief, though I couldn't shake the feeling that they could change at any moment. To distract myself, I grabbed a duster and wandered through the store, wiping down shelves and counters. The repetitive motion was calming, almost meditative, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe the rest of the night might pass without incident. Then the phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the stillness, startling me so much that I nearly dropped the duster. I hurried back to the counter, staring at the old rotary phone that sat next to the register. It wasn't modern, no caller ID, just a plain black handset with a faint scratch across the receiver. Who would call at this hour? I muttered. The ringing continued, insistent and shrill. I hesitated, remembering Anne's story about her phone ringing during her shift. But that was when she was mopping the drink aisle, right? This was different. At least, I hoped it was. Finally, I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then a faint voice broke through, distant and garbled, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Are you busy?" the voice asked. My stomach twisted. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. It sounded like me. "What?" I whispered, gripping the phone tighter. "Are you keeping busy?" the voice repeated, clearer this time. I slammed the receiver down, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice had been identical to mine, right down to the slight rasp I got when I was tired. I backed away from the counter, my mind racing. This had to be part of the game, another trick to mess with me. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed the compact mirror from under the counter, my hands shaking as I angled it toward the rear camera monitor. The lot was empty. No figures, no movement, just the same stretch of concrete and darkness as before. The ringing stopped abruptly, leaving the store in eerie silence once more. I set the mirror down, trying to steady my breathing. "It's fine," I told myself. "It's just a scare tactic." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I forced myself to focus on the cleaning tasks, wiping down the counters and rearranging the snack shelves. The mundane work helped calm my nerves, though I kept glancing at the monitors every few minutes, half expecting to see Fred, or worse. By 1:30 a.m., I had convinced myself that the worst was over. The store was quiet, and the parking lot remained empty. I even started to feel a bit foolish for panicking earlier. The rules, while bizarre, seemed manageable as long as I followed them. Then the knocking started. It was faint at first, a soft tapping that seemed to come from the front door. I froze, my hand hovering over a bag of chips I had been restocking. The taps grew louder, more insistent. Someone, or something, was out there. I glanced at the front monitor. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no people, no shadowy figures. But the knocking continued. "Don't open the door," I muttered, repeating the rule to myself like a mantra. I crouched down behind the counter, my heart racing as I peeked over the edge. The glass door was partially obscured by a promotional display, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing just outside. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice, soft, almost pleading. "Alex, it's me. Open the door." My blood ran cold. The voice belonged to Anne. "Alex, come on," she said, her tone calm and familiar. "I forgot to tell you something important. You need to let me in." I hesitated, my mind racing. It sounded exactly like her, but something felt off. Why would Anne be here in the middle of the night? And how did she know I was working tonight? "Just open the door," the voice continued. "I need to show you something." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Rule 8 echoed in my mind. Do not open the door for anyone after 4 a.m., even if they knock. But it wasn't 4 a.m. yet. Did that mean it was safe? I grabbed the mirror again, angling it toward the front monitor. The figure outside the door was blurry in the reflection, its features distorted and indistinct. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You're not, Anne." The figure outside shifted, its outline flickering like a bad signal on an old TV. Then, slowly, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. I stayed crouched behind the counter for what felt like an eternity, my body tense and trembling. When I finally worked up the courage to stand, the store was silent again. The rest of the night passed in a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. I didn't answer the phone when it rang again. I didn't check the rear camera more than I had to. I stayed busy, cleaning and organizing and doing whatever I could to keep my mind off the growing unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket. When the clock finally struck 6 a.m., I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, and the oppressive weight of the night seemed to lift. I locked the doors, grabbed my things, and left without looking back. The sun was just beginning to rise as I pulled into my driveway, the soft hues of dawn casting a comforting glow over the neighborhood. But the relief I felt upon leaving the gas station was fleeting. I couldn't shake the sensation that something had followed me home, that the eerie silence of the store had clung to me like a shadow. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me with trembling hands. My small apartment, usually a haven, felt unnervingly quiet. Every creak of the floorboards, Every hum of the refrigerator seemed amplified in the stillness. Dropping my keys on the kitchen counter, I made my way to the bathroom. The sight of my own reflection in the mirror startled me. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, a face pale and drawn from a night of fear. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the lingering dread. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling sound, coming from the living room. My heart skipped a beat as I stood frozen, listening intently. It could have been the wind, or maybe the old pipes. But deep down, I knew better. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy flashlight, and crept toward the living room. The air felt heavier with each step, a palpable tension that made it hard to breathe. When I rounded the corner, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The curtains were drawn, the furniture undisturbed, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I turned back toward the hallway, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, stretched across the wall. It didn't move with the natural light, didn't shift like the shadow of a tree outside the window. It was still, fixed, and pointing toward my bedroom. "Not again," I whispered, gripping the flashlight tighter. I didn't want to follow it, but my feet moved on their own, drawn toward the doorway. The shadow grew darker, more defined, as I approached. By the time I reached the threshold, it was no longer a shadow. It was a figure. Tall, indistinct, and pulsating with an unnatural energy, it stood at the far end of the room, its form flickering like an old TV screen stuck between channels. My legs felt like they would give out beneath me, but I couldn't look away. "Alex!" The voice was faint, distorted, but unmistakably mine. The figure took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the doorframe. My mind raced, trying to recall anything from the red sheet that might help me now. But this wasn't the gas station, and there were no rules to follow here. The figure stopped suddenly, its head tilting to one side as if studying me. Then, just as abruptly as it had appeared, it dissolved into the shadows, leaving the room empty once more. I didn't sleep that day. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure, felt its presence lingering just out of sight. I spent the morning researching, combing through forums and obscure websites for any explanation. But all I found were vague references to shadow entities, ghostly mimics, and places that seemed to attract the inexplicable. By the afternoon, I was exhausted, but no closer to understanding what had happened. I considered calling Anne, demanding answers, but the thought of hearing her voice, or something pretending to be her voice, made my stomach churn. As the day stretched into evening, I realized I couldn't avoid the gas station forever. The strange occurrences at my apartment, the oppressive sense of dread, all seemed to stem from that place. If I didn't go back, if I didn't confront whatever was happening, it might never leave me alone. So, as the clock ticked closer to 10 p.m., I found myself standing outside the gas station once more. The sight of the familiar yellow light, the faint hum of the coolers inside, did little to calm my nerves. And was waiting for me at the counter, her expression unreadable. She didn't greet me with her usual smile, didn't ask how my day had been. Instead, she slid a new red sheet across the counter toward me. "Read this carefully," she said, her voice low. "Tonight's going to be different." I unfolded the paper, my hands trembling as I scanned the text. The rules were the same, but at the bottom, a new set of instructions had been added. 11. If a shadow follows you home, do not acknowledge it. Ignore its presence, no matter how persistent it may be. Do not speak to it, do not interact with it. 12. If the shadow appears inside the store, stay busy. Clean, organize, do anything to appear occupied. A busy employee is a safe employee. 13. If the shadow speaks, do not respond. Cover your ears and focus on your tasks. I looked up at Anne, my throat dry. "What's going on? What is this?" She didn't answer, just gave me a long, weary look. "You're lucky to still be here, Alex. Just follow the rules, and you'll make it through." Her words did little to reassure me, but I nodded anyway. What choice did I have? As Anne gathered her things and left, the oppressive silence of the gas station settled over me once more. I stood behind the counter, clutching the red sheet like a lifeline, and waited for the night to begin. The first hour of my shift passed in a tense silence. I tried to stay busy, as the red sheet instructed, cleaning the counters and organizing the snack shelves. But every so often, I caught myself glancing at the security monitors, half expecting to see something. Someone staring back at me. The gas station was eerily quiet, even for the late hour. The usual hum of the coolers and the occasional creak of the building felt amplified, each sound setting my nerves on edge. I kept the lights dimmed on the right half of the store, leaving the left side cast in shadows. That half felt like a no man's land, a dark and foreboding space I avoided unless absolutely necessary. Around midnight, the mopping routine began. I prepared the bucket, filling it with warm, soapy water, and grabbed a pair of headphones from my bag. Anne's voice echoed in my mind, "Wear headphones. Block out the sounds." I didn't question her advice this time. The refrigerated drinks aisle stretched long and narrow, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on the tiled floor. I started at one end, pushing the mop back and forth in a steady rhythm, keeping my head down. The music in my ears helped, drowning out the oppressive silence, but it didn't stop the creeping sense of being watched. Halfway through the aisle, I felt it, the weight of something standing behind me. My grip on the mop tightened as a cold sweat broke out on my brow. The red sheet's instructions were clear: do not leave the aisle or stop mopping until the specified time. I forced myself to keep moving, my eyes fixed on the floor. The urge to turn around was overwhelming, but I clung to the rules like a lifeline. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing second, the air around me heavy and suffocating. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a faint shadow stretching along the edge of the aisle. It wasn't mine. The shadow didn't move, didn't shift like a natural shadow would. It was still, unnaturally defined, as if it were etched into the floor. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. The clock on my watch ticked agonizingly slowly, each second dragging on like an eternity. 12:24 a.m. One more minute. I kept mopping, my movements robotic, my breathing shallow. The shadow remained fixed, an unyielding presence at the edge of my vision. I counted down the seconds in my head, willing the clock to move faster. 12:25 a.m. I dropped the mop and bolted out of the aisle, my headphones slipping from my ears. The air felt lighter the moment I left, the oppressive weight lifting as if it had never been there. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. Back at the counter, I took a moment to catch my breath, my hands shaking as I reached for the red sheet. The next task wasn't until 1 a.m. That gave me 35 minutes to collect myself, to steady my nerves before the next challenge. The cameras were my next focus. I scanned each feed carefully, checking for anything unusual. The parking lot was empty, the pumps deserted. The store's interior seemed quiet, the aisles undisturbed. But when I switched to the back lot feed, the one it had called Fred's camera, my stomach dropped. There it was. The shadowy figure stood just within the frame, its form dark and indistinct, like smoke frozen in place. It wasn't looking at the camera directly, but its presence was enough to send a chill down my spine. The red sheet's instructions were clear: duck under the counter. Do not look at Fred's monitor. Wait 5 minutes before checking with the compact mirror. I crouched down, my body pressed against the cold tile floor. The minutes crawled by as I sat there, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the store's lights. I counted the seconds under my breath, gripping the compact mirror and had stashed under the register. At last, 5 minutes passed. I held up the mirror, angling it toward the monitor. My breath caught in my throat. Fred was still there. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't shifted. It stood perfectly still, its amorphous form pulsing faintly as if alive. I ducked back down, my heart pounding in my ears. Another 5 minutes. Another check. This time, the monitor was empty. Fred was gone. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me like a wave. But the feeling was short-lived. The red sheet's final rule echoed in my mind. If the four shadows of the gas pumps all face toward the store, it's time to act. I glanced at the front window, at the long, dark shapes cast by the pumps outside. My heart stopped. The shadows were all pointing toward me. The realization hit me like a freight train. This was it. The out-of-town visitors and had warned me about. The rules weren't just suggestions. They were survival instructions. I didn't have much time. I bolted toward the back room, nearly tripping over a mop bucket in my haste. The light panel was exactly where, and had said it would be, a row of switches that controlled the store's electricity. My hands shook as I flipped them all, plunging the gas station into darkness. The store felt eerily silent, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I fumbled for the storage room door, locking and deadbolting it behind me. The small space was cramped and filled with the smell of cardboard and cleaning supplies, but it felt like a sanctuary. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, clutching my phone. Anne's number was already dialed. The line rang once, twice, before she picked up. "Alex." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "You're in the storage room, right?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The shadows, they all turned toward the store. "Good. Stay there. Don't make a sound. They'll leave if the store looks closed." Her words were meant to reassure me, but they only heightened my fear. What about Fred? What if he gets in? There was a pause, a hesitation that sent a chill down my spine. "Just stay busy if he does. Act normal. You'll be fine." The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. Minutes turned into hours, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional creak of the building. Every sound made me jump, every shadow on the wall a potential threat. At some point, exhaustion took over. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the storage room door. I stepped out cautiously, the store bathed in the soft light of morning. Everything looked normal, as if the night's horrors had been nothing more than a bad dream. But the memory of Fred's shadow, of the oppressive presence in the aisle, was all too real, and was waiting for me at the counter, her expression somber. "You made it," she said simply, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. As I walked out of the gas station, the morning air cool against my skin, I realized that I couldn't keep doing this. Whatever was happening here, whatever rules governed this place, it was too much. But as I got into my car and drove away, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if I couldn't leave?